Hi, Stephen. Glad to have you today. Just wanted to catch up with you a little bit. You've got a real background in understanding human physiology, and you've got a really good understanding of scripture.
Excuse me.
And you've kind of put those two things together. Maybe you could give us a little bit of background as to why that's an important thing to you.
Well, it's important because we are, excuse me, Mark, we are an extension of our belief system. And if I'm going to hold myself out to be a believer, you would think, especially as a creationist, that I would assume that there was a manual for me. And there is a manual, and we have misused it, since it was first given to us. Very few people have decided that they would gather anything from it other than their stubbornness has allowed them to rebel against what I would consider being obedient, including me.
So the manual you're referring to is the Bible?
Yes.
Okay.
And specifically, it's the Torah.
Sure, got it.
And the Torah, anytime that you can change the meaning of a word, you can alter a whole culture.
Right.
And when when they frequently talk about the Torah being a book of laws, actually it's a book of instructions on how to live. And within that, there are principles that allow us to eat and become really incredibly clean. And throughout the whole scripture, no matter whether you're speaking in terms of spiritual being or physical or financial, it talks about purity.
Okay, so do you think that having a clean body is kind of synonymous with being healthy?
Oh, absolutely. Where there's cleanliness, it's friction free. It performs better. So if we eat foods today because we don't understand them, that causes degradation in the system itself, it would make sense to find out what the fuel that makes the most ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, and the purity of that as it burns in our system in terms of efficiency. And we haven't figured that out. In fact, they took out what burns purest in the 50s, which was fat.
Oh.
And
so you're saying the American nutrition that the foods that we're eating today are probably not as healthy as we would like them to be, and they have a tendency to clog our system.
Totally.
Okay.
And even the brain.
So if I could use an analogy, that would be kind of like putting kerosene in a Ferrari.
It wouldn't run long.
Yeah, it wouldn't run long. Wouldn't run very well.
Well, as an athlete, and Mark, you are that, and you're a technical thinker, and it's about performance with you.
Sure.
And as a pastor, you would like to look out at your congregation and say something to, if we really wanted to be this temple that we were designed,
right,
and this light into the world, how would we best do that other than living a lifestyle that is based on biblical principles?
Sure. So in your background, the research that you've done, now you brought up the concept of ATP. I don't know that most people know what that is. Maybe you could explain that very quickly.
Oh, it's 3 phosphate molecules put together that produce 95% of the energy of the body, which is really interesting because we live in a world of stimulants.
Right.
And we eat poorly and then stimulated because without energy, nothing happens.
So the stimulant that most people use today, I mean legal ones at least, would be probably what, caffeine and sugar?
That's it.
Yeah. And that's what contributes to clogging up the system and helping us to become obese, right?
All of the above.
Yeah, we lose sleep. Yeah. So it's not really a very healthy lifestyle to eat poorly, especially junk food or fast food, clog up the system, feel lethargic, and then start using caffeine or sugar to try to supplement to help yourself stay awake and to do all that. It's really not a healthy thing, is it?
No, it isn't. And from just a practical viewpoint, as we either run our own business or we hire ourselves out to somebody, you would think that we would want to perform for them optimally.
Sure.
And right now we're dealing with some crazy rules, and I think everyone recognizes that 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people.
Right, right.
So what would happen if we were holding ourselves to be principled in terms of running a business? Why wouldn't we take that 80% that only does 20% of the work and show them how through if I may use a word called attitude, raise that attitude to where they can function at a higher level, what would that do to the whole business, particularly when everybody is feeling really good?
Sure.
What would that mean to the Christian community? And we are that menorah or that light unto the world, and our fuel is really different than what the secular world feeds on.
So you've done a lot of research into the efficiency of that kind of workplace environment, and you've got a background as a naturopathic doctor. You've got a background that is kind of interesting. It's unique, and it has to do with frequencies. Maybe you could help me understand a little bit more. How does that affect our attitude?
Well, kind of the higher the frequency, the closer to God you are.
Okay.
I mean, that's good. And if that's the case, we do know now with just a host of studies, starting back in the 30s, if you will, that the body functions in megahertz speed, kind of an overall about 60 megahertz speed is where it functions. We also know that cancer thrives at about 40.
40 megahertz, okay.
Yeah. And the brain functions at around that 90 figure. So if you eat processed foods, they have a zero frequency. So it lowers everything.
So when you say zero frequency, literally it's dead food.
It's dead food.
So it's not really good for you.
Right. Fills your gut.
Yeah.
And so what they do with that, though, is they backfill it with sugars. Because anybody that goes to McDonald's recognizes if you get a Happy Meal, you get a big old blob of meat and a couple of buns and a free drink. Well, the free drink's loaded with sugar because you've got to feel like you've gained something like energy. The only problem is just dealing with sugar. If people understood that there's about 5 to 7 liters of blood in their system, and 1 liter of blood will handle 1 gram of sugar, then if you have something over here that's got 30 or 40 grams of sugar, you got to know it's going to obesity.
So you're really telling me by saying that 7 liters of blood in our system can handle 7 grams of sugar. So anything over that ends up getting stored and tends to turn into fat. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And again, obesity, we hear it a lot, but Americans by and large are generally considered to be obese, across the board, and that obesity leads to all sorts of diseases. Mm-hmm. What kinds of diseases are we trying to fight here?
Well, why don't we just start with periodontal issues?
Oh, okay.
By the time we reach the age of 50, 70% of Americans have periodontal issues. And if we want to talk about savings, when you consider one implant is somewhere between $2 and $4 grand, and the average person is looking at 2 to 3 to 4 implants, plus all of the issues that go with it, it's a pretty expensive thing not to function in that arena. And then when you look at the periodontists who are teaching it, now we can say virtually every disease in our body originates in the mouth, from cancer to Alzheimer's disease.
Wow. So you're saying periodontal is the any kind of a system that has to do with your teeth and oral health. Is that pretty much it? Okay.
Yeah, and just kind of think about it. If you get a sandwich, 1 piece of bread is worth 5 grams of sugar.
Wow.
So that's when you eat that, it turns into glucose immediately, and the dentists call it biofilm. Coats the tooth, and the decay process begins.
Wow.
So it's and we need to look at that and say, all right, those are given facts. Why do we consistently pursue a sugar diet? Would it be that we have an emotional issue because sugar triggers the dopamine, and the dopamine is that feel-good hormone, so while you feel good, you're getting sick? It's quite an analogy, but if we just addressed it like that and said, if you eat a biblical way, we're going to start first with fats. And if we begin with fats, fat produces 8 times more ATP than does protein or carbohydrates, with none of the insulin that's necessary. So we live in a world where there isn't much insulin, which then, from a biblical viewpoint, now science background, it creates this thing called autophagy, which sends a medium chain triglyceride back through the system and cleans out all of the body. So by eating correctly, not only do we get more energy, But my Messiah said, I built in this cleaner for you, and it will clean out and take everything, the rubbish, the exhaust that's created from the burn, clean it up where you live freely.
So when you say fat, you're of course referring to healthy
fats.
Healthy fats.
Seeds and avocado. Yeah.
Right. So you're talking fats that you get from, say, fruits and vegetables and nuts.
And seeds.
And seeds, as opposed to potato chips and French fries.
As opposed to.
Yeah, okay.
So, we can get into this and really drill down into it, because the emotional thing is what drives us. Mm-hmm. It drives our eating habits. And if we're having an oh, woe is me pity party, maybe we're insecure about the future, what it means to us, our jobs, and just looking at the rate of inflation, financially.
Right.
Maybe we ought to take a look at honing this thing down, eating correctly, because with easy numbers, we're told that eating correctly is costing. It is very, very efficient to eat the way I eat. My breakfast costs me 30 cents.
Wow.
And it gives me 6 hours of energy.
Amazing.
So why would we eat something that's a box of cereal is 50% sugar, gives you an hour's worth of energy, and creates all of this devastation?
Right. Not to mention the letdown after the sugar leaves your blood system, and then you feel tired, so you drink coffee, and then you've got even another problem with caffeine.
Yeah.
So right, we're constantly self-medicating, aren't we? Trying to adjust that. So what you're really recommending here in what we'd like to term as a biblical view of eating and health, what you're really referring to here is the opportunity for us to learn about how our body works, how God has designed our body, and what mechanisms and tools that we have available to us through this course of study that would then help us to be healthier, more efficient, have better cognitive skills, hopefully get onto a better exercise regime, possibly lose weight. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to this, aren't there?
It's unlimited.
It's unlimited. So I can't wait to get started.